In previous videos we talked about the quadratic formula as a means of solving different types of quadratic equations, and if you remember from the previous examples that we had different types of solutions available to us. There is, however, a way of knowing what those solutions are going to be prior to you working the problem. And if you notice the pattern as we work through this, and if you didn't, you can go back and look at the previous examples, but there was a pattern that had to do specifically with the value underneath the square root sign. So the value underneath the square root sign, which is represented by b squared minus 4ac, is what we call the discriminant value. Now, it's very important that you don't misunderstand this. The discriminant value does not include the square root. So it does not include the square root sign. So this is extremely important. The discriminant value is only b squared minus 4ac. Now, what we can do is we can actually take that discriminant value, and the discriminant tells us the number and the type of solutions. So you can see here that we have a little bullet list for you that shows you when and what type of solutions that you're going to get. So this would be something that you might want to commit to memory. It's best recognized through practice, which gets you experience with it. But here's the gist of it. If the discriminant value is greater than 0, then we're talking about it having two real solutions. If it's equal to 0 exactly, it's one real solution, and which means that it's a perfect square trinomial. And then if it's less than 0, so if we have a negative value in the discriminant, we recognize that a negative value underneath the square root is actually going to provide us with two imaginary solutions. So the more you work with this, the quicker you will be to recognize what type of solutions you're going to have once you set up the quadratic formula. Now this is extremely important because this allows you to know what your final answer should look like. So if we go down and look at another example, we can actually use the discriminant b squared minus 4ac without using the entire quadratic formula, and we can determine what type and how many of each solution we're going to have. So you can see here in this example, the discriminant in each of these cases gives us a specific value. And even though we do not work out the quadratic formula, we've given you the answers here. And you can see when it was negative, that gave us two imaginary solutions. When it was 0, it had one real solution. And of course, when the discriminant was positive, we had two real solutions. Now, what we're going to see next is something that we've talked about extensively in class, and that's the relationship of the types of solutions, or the root values, in relation to the graph. So you can see with these three different quadratic functions, the only thing that we've changed is the c value. Now in changing that c value, we have graphed each of the quadratic functions, and you can see that in one case we hit the x-axis twice, here and here. In another case we hit the x-axis once, and then in the third case we do not hit the x-axis at all. And so that is the relationship that we've been discussing between two real solutions and two x-intercepts, one real solution and one x-intercept, and or two imaginary solutions and no x-intercepts. And so this is the culmination of all of that work. Now there's an easy, quick way to figure this out, and that's through the use of the discriminant. So what we want to do is we want to figure this out a little bit ahead of time so that we can know what we're dealing with before we even come to the final answer. So in this final problem, sample problem number 4, all we're asking you to do is to take the quadratic, which should already be in standard form for you. If it's not, you would need to rewrite it in standard form. and take the discriminant. Remember, the discriminant does not have the square root sign. It's just simply b squared minus 4ac. So go ahead and pause the video now and work sample problem 4, part A, B, and C. Okay, so from an identification standpoint, the first thing we need to do is to identify our parts. And so we are going to take b squared, which is 6 squared minus 4 times a times c, and this is going to give us 36 minus 36, which is equal to 0. Now notice the question asks us to give the number and type of solutions. What we mean by the number is that we're going to have one solution, because it's 0, and that solution is going to be real. So this represents the number of solutions, this represents the type of solutions. Okay, so let's move on down to part B. Alright, in this particular case, we're going to have A is equal to 9 again, B is equal to 6, but this time C is going to equal to negative 4, which should surely make a difference. So B squared is 6 squared minus 4 times A times C, and if we just do our order of operations, we end up with, a positive 180. Now this number represents the discriminant. It is really irrelevant whether it is a 1, a 180, or a 1 million. The fact that it's a positive number tells us that there are two solutions and they are both real. So that's our number and our type. Okay, and then we move into the last one. And so we recognize A is 9, B is 6, and C is 5. So 6 squared minus 4 times A times C, which is going to give us 36 minus 180, which is negative 144. Again, it doesn't matter how deep into the negative numbers it is. As long as it's negative, that tells us that there's going to be two solutions, but they're both going to be imaginary. So again, that's the number, and that is the type. Okay, so this example should give you the opportunity to kind of know what you're going to be dealing with for your final answer before you even start.